All right, what's up everyone? This is Don with Third Creative, and this is the walkthrough tutorial video for Final Drive Football. In this video, I'm going to be super thorough. I'm going to cover all the layers, the processes, and hopefully by the time I'm done, I will have covered anything and everything that you might need to know in order to make the best images possible with this design. A few things before we jump into it. You'll notice the individuals here are all kind of featured as a double image, which I really like. It is a little extra work, and I know it's not for every job, so rest assured I have an option for single image. So don't let that scare you away. But you can see some of the sample images that we have here. Obviously it works well for flag football, so you'll see here, but also you can see kind of the various color schemes. You can go real light bright or real vivid and rich bold colors. You can go dark and moody. It can work for all sorts of different looks, and I wanted to throw in a cheer example just so you can kind of see that it could work for cheer as well. But let's jump into it. We are going to be working with the 2x3 vertical file. Just keep in mind that for the most part, everything that we cover here with this file is going to apply across the board to the other files as well. There's a few specific things about the horizontal files that I'll touch on towards the very end, but as I said, it should all be pretty standard stuff across the board. So first things first, are you going to do double images or single images? So you'll notice this lowest red folder here is optional second subject image. So if you're going to do double images, you would leave this on. It's on by default, but if you're not, you can go ahead and turn it off. But let's jump down here to the bottom and we'll look at the background. May have typoed that there. We'll fix that. Background layers is what we're looking at. In the very bottom of that folder, we've got change background color. Now, if you've been using templates or my templates for any amount of time, you've already got this down, but it's very simple. There's a icon right here with the color blue. If you double click that, you'll get your color picker pulled up. And from here, you can use this slider and kind of click around inside to get the lightness or brightness or how dark you want, how saturated you want, how desaturated you want. You can also come over here and use your eyedropper and sample from their uniform just to get you a good starting point. And then you can kind of play around with it until you get a color that you think looks pretty good. So we'll cancel that. Very simple. Next we have our background image. So you can see we've got some bleachers, football field bleachers here. If I turn it off, it goes away. That looks pretty nice, just like that, even without it. But I do have the opacity pretty low on this. It's 25%. So if I go to 100, you can see, well, that didn't work. Let's try it again. If I go to 100, you can see much more bold, contrasty look. I personally probably wouldn't ever go up to 100 just because I think it's a little too busy and distracting, and it's a fine line. But you can play around with the opacity, get different levels. By default, it's at 25. You could even go lower if you want it to be super subtle. Totally up to you. Next, we have our upper stadium glow left and stadium light glow right. This is a very subtle detail, but just out of the frame, there are stadium lights. And so I added a little bit of extra glow that kind of casts down, just so you kind of know that they're up there. If I were to select all of these layers, I can move it down to show you. So you may even want to move it down so that they show. Totally up to you. Again, too busy, not too busy. It's a fine line. I decided to leave them out of frame just to kind of draw more attention to the subject and make the background a little more subtle. But anyways, they're at 50%. You can change the opacity, turn them on, turn them off if you want to. Next we have a lower background glow. So basically you can kind of see it's a little lighter right here behind this nameplate. So if I turn that off, you can see it just kind of evens out. Overlay is the blend mode, and it is at 100% already. So if you wanted more, you can always duplicate the layer and get really bold with it. If you want less, you can always reduce the opacity to the amount that you like. You can also play around with the you know, soft light blend mode. Depending on the color that you pick, you know, it may not look as good with a different color, so going with soft light is always an option. We have the upper background glow, so it's basically the same thing. It's set to overlay. It's much bigger. If I turn it off, you can see it really flattens out. So it just kind of adds to the vignette effect. It makes it a little lighter, brighter, more vivid towards the center, with a little darker around the edges. Next we have our, I've called it X's and O's lower. So X's and O's is just referring to these little diagrams of a play. So it's a little accent, a little element that I added to give it a little more of a football field. You've got your football plays. So this one is, actually they're mislabeled. I'm doing really good. So this says lower, but it's actually the upper. This one says upper, and it's actually the lower. So I'll need to fix that. But you'll figure it out. So you can actually move these around if you want to. You can have more off. You can scale them smaller, larger. You can play around with these. You could even turn them off if you feel like it's just too much. You can turn them off, totally up to you. But if you want to change the color of either of them, you can select color overlay. These are set to white, but what I did was reduce the opacity to 20%. So there's, you know, a few things you could do. You could increase the opacity to 100%. Well, that's definitely too busy. But if you go in and change the color, you can sample in here. You can barely see it, but then you can start playing with it, and you get kind of the same look. So it just depends, but by having the opacity low, some of the texture kind of shows through from the background. So if you struggle with it, just know that 20% opacity is there. So no matter what color you choose, unless you increase the opacity, it's going to be kind of faint and subtle. And that's it for the background layers. We'll close that up, and you can see if we turn that off, everything that's in there. Next, I have a center subject border outline. So let me explain this. You can see, let me get off of here. You can see this little border that kind of goes around. It kind of frames this text at the top, this vertical text on the left. If I turn this off, it's the same over here on the right hand side. So if I turn it off, you can see that goes away. So let's explain how I set this up. I've got two layer masks on here. So what I did is I created a folder and I put a layer mask on it, and I have the actual shape layer inside the folder with a stroke outline. So if you want to change the color of this border, you would double click the word stroke, click on the color icon here, and it's the same thing. We already went over that, but you can change the color to anything that you want. Now, the important thing to know about this is that if you change, which you would most likely, change what this says. If you change the size of the text, or if you type something that's longer or shorter, this may not be framed out as perfectly. So you would need to adjust the layer mask, which is very simple. And I guess I'll just go ahead and demonstrate it. If I come up to the folder above, so I'm going to type in something longer. So I'm going to put in Maverick football. All right, so now you can see, and actually, just for demonstration purposes, I'll copy that and paste it. Okay, we've changed it. It doesn't fit. So come back down here to your center subject border outline folder, and you'll see this mask here. That is what creates the openings on the left and the right side. There's a chain link here. If you click that chain link, you can unlock the mask. Now make sure that the mask is selected. You can see how kind of highlights around the edges here. Make sure you have your move tool, and if so, you should see the transform controls. If not, up here you will see this check mark. Make sure it's checked so that you can see this. Now all you have to do is click on the top and drag up as far as you need to. Click on the bottom, drag down as far as you need to, hit the check mark, come back over here, click in between these two to relock it, and you've adjusted it. Same thing applies up here at the top. If you type something that's wider or more narrow, all you have to do is click this chain link on the actual shape layer, select the layer mask, make sure you have your move tool, and rather than coming from the left and the right, what I would recommend, just so that you keep it perfectly centered, on a Mac it's going to be, what is it, Shift and Option. If you hold those two down, you can click up and down and it will make it more narrow, wider, but it keeps it centered. If you're on a PC, then that should be Shift Alt, and holding them down and just click and drag up or down, and you get the idea. So that's how you adjust those two layer masks once you type in the text that's going to be on this border frame. So speaking of the border frame, next folder up, I labeled it upper text layers, but it's basically the text that falls within that border. And so it's pretty simple. All of these you can change the color either up here in your character panel, your properties. If you double click to select the text, then you can come up here to the top toolbar and you can change the color to anything that you want. Pretty self-explanatory. At the very bottom of this, I have left edge background vertical. So let me turn that on. Now, this is very subtle. I have the color set to black and I have the opacity at 20%, and it says Trojans. It makes it a little bit busy, but if we go back and look at some of these, you'll notice that, okay, right here I don't have the football field lines on the left-hand side. So you can see Eagles. Same thing with the cheer, the Coyotes. It's just an option, a look that you can go for. So maybe you want both of them, maybe you don't, but you can turn off one of these football field diagram images or layers if you want to use that. So same thing, you can type in whatever it is. I'm going to put in Raiders. You can leave it how it lands, or you can scale it up so that it runs off the edges just a little bit. Move it over, position it how you think it looks good. You could, you can unleash your internal designer. So maybe you want it to be just up here towards the top, just down here towards the bottom. Just play around with it, see what looks good if you choose to use this. But of course you can increase or reduce the opacity. You can change the color just like any other text layer. But that's what that is, and that's why it's there if you choose to use it. And that's everything in the upper text layer folder. Next we've got a vignette. Vignettes I think are pretty important. I'm not sure how many of you go in and adjust it, but depending on the color scheme that you go for, you may need to adjust this to get a better look. It's kind of subtle now. You can kind of see when I turn it off and turn it back on. But jumping back here, I've got some pretty drastic increases on some of these, especially this red one here. I went pretty deep, but let me show you how you would do that. So it's just an exposure adjustment layer, and this icon right here, if you double click it, you'll either get a properties window that pops up, or I have my properties up here in my workspace. So you'll see this exposure slider. You can move it left if you want it more dramatic. You can move it right if you want it less dramatic. That's pretty simple. Another thing that you can do if you want is to double click on this layer mask, and when you do that, it's going to give you the properties of the layer mask, and you have this feather slider. So if you want it to be less gradual, which you may not want to go that far with it, but you can play with the feather of this to fine-tune the look even more. And the last thing that you can do, if I zoom out here, is click on one of these control anchors. Again, we're going to hold down Shift and Alt or Shift and Option, and you can move it in, you can move it out, or you can just independently work with the sides depending on what you want to accomplish here. But that's another way to adjust the vignette. So it's important, if you go really dark, you may need to go darker with the vignette so that it shows up. If you go really light, you might find that the default vignette is too much. You might want to reduce the level of exposure, decrease, I guess. Just figure out what looks good or best with the color scheme that you are setting up. Let's jump back to the optional second subject image. So this is a folder that you would drop your subject images into. I've got a sample subject image here. Basically, you would drag and drop them into this folder. There's a layer mask. So if I turn that off, you can see what happens, but basically make sure that nothing shows beyond this line. Now, you can unlock that layer mask, and the same thing, select the layer mask, and you can move it in or out. You can adjust it like that if you want to. More than likely you won't need to, but basically when you put your subject in here, you know, it may land something like this. You would need to then make sure that you don't reduce the opacity. Let's get that back up to 100. Move it, scale it, position it how you want it. Pretty simple. Let's get it back the way that it was. There we go. And again, if you're not going double image, just turn it off. All right, so let's come up here to football field diagram border. So this is the hash marks and the lines. It's these little accents along the edge. So I've got two of them in here. They both have a color overlay. So if you want both of them to be the same color, then you would just come up here to the actual folder, double click on the color overlay that you see there, and you can make them any color you want. Now if you want them to be a different color from each other, you would need to turn off this color overlay that's on the folder itself so that you can use the color overlays independently. So if you want one red, one white, you know, it's up to you. Also, in the sample images, some of them I turned one off, however you would say that. Some of them I moved them around, some of them I scaled them larger, smaller. Again, it's an opportunity to, you know, be a designer and figure out what looks best. But these are all, you know, pretty simple. Just color overlays, scaling and positioning if you even need to move them from where they are. Next, we have our subject frame. And so that's this shape here that is behind the subject. So if we open it up, you'll notice we've got a shape layer, and again, we've got a layer mask. So the layer mask that's on this is what creates these angled corners that you have here. So if you want it to just be a perfect rectangle, you can right click on the layer mask and hit disable layer mask. I like to just hold down Shift and click on the layer mask to enable and disable. So if you disable it, you can see it's just a perfect rectangle. To change the color of this frame, you would go to the shape layer itself and double click on the word color overlay and pick the color that you want. Pretty simple. If you want to change the size, you can unlock this layer mask. You could make it taller, you could make it wider, and then come over to the layer mask and just kind of scale and position it how you want it. So you can adjust that if you want to. I just found that it helped me to turn this off, get the size and the centering of the shape layer itself where I wanted it, and then adjust the mask how I wanted it. More than likely, you're not gonna want or need to do that. You know, there'll be it'd affect a lot. It would cover up potentially some of the text and everything, but I just know the questions I get, so I wanted to just go ahead and cover it, because sometimes, you know, people will do the unexpected. We also have a stroke outline option, so if I turn that on, it's actually set to a light gray, so you can't see it. Let's go with red. You can see it's super thin, super subtle, but you can come up here to the size slider, or in this field, enter a higher value, and you can make it more prominent. And that's if you decide that you want to go with the stroke outline. So let's go ahead and close that up. Next we have our background image. So basically what I did is I made it match the one that's down here in the background, but I wanted to make it where you have the option to not have the background image show in the frame as well. So if you turn it off, you can see you can get a solid color. So the opacity is what, 25%. You could reduce that if you wanted it to be super subtle. You could increase it if you want it to be more prominent. And there is a levels adjustment layer in here that you can play with if you want to adjust the contrast. But it's up to you whether you leave it on or you leave it off. Whether you leave it on or off, you do also have the option to add an extra vignette in there. So if you turn it off, you can see that looks good too. And it's just like the other vignette. You can come up to your properties and make it bolder or less bold. But you have these options and combinations that you can use to get a look that works for the project that you're on. Next we have our paper texture. It's pretty subtle, but you can see it's here. And you can see it here. So if I turn it off, you can see it just gets a lot more cleaner and smoother, and maybe that's a look you want. It is at 100% opacity with a multiplied blend mode. So you could try darken, which in this color you don't really see it. You can play around with blend modes. You could reduce the opacity if you want it to be a little more subtle. And you can play with the levels. If you want it to be a little more prominent, you could always increase the darks. Just options for fine tuning, but it just adds a little bit of a texture to it. Next we have our subject images. So I'll open that up and kind of explain. I've got 2 layer masks because there's 2 things that I wanted to achieve here, and I can't put 2 layer masks on one layer. So we've got our folder, a subfolder where you would put your subject images. Now, the subfolder has a gradient mask, so you can see his legs kind of fade into the white. So if I turn that off, then it's just going to be a hard cutoff at the bottom edge. The bottom edge is here. And if I select this, let me see if I can get it to show up. Yeah, you can see the layer mask. It follows the bottom contour of this corner. So if your subject were to extend out here, it's not going to show. So you may need to adjust these layer masks, you know, if you have some funky pose, but I tried to set it up where it would work. Now, speaking of this gradient mask, there was one sample image, this one right here, where I adjusted it because I wanted that orange to really come up high, kind of give you the appearance of kind of an orange haze. And so if you want to do that, you can unlock this layer mask. And actually, you know what I would recommend is not unlocking it, just selecting the layer mask, going to your gradient tool, making sure you're working with black to white or white to black, and just clicking and dragging down. You can hold down shift to keep it straight, and then you can play with these anchors here to get it how you like. Very simple. Let's undo all of that. And of course, this is where you drag and drop your subjects. You scale and position them how you want them, unless you're using automation, which many of you are. All right, we're getting there. Let's see, we've got our lower nameplate layers. So let's open that up and take a look. Actually, we have a few layers clipped to this folder, so I'll explain that real quick. We've got our paper grunge texture. I had to do a separate but the same texture. This one's, well, it's not the same. It's a little more grungy. So if you turn it off, you can see it gets a lot cleaner. I don't have levels applied to this. It's at 100%. So if you want it to be a little more subtle, you could reduce the opacity if you wanted to. I also have this upper glow highlight, so we'll go ahead and turn that off, and you can see it just kind of flattens out this upper nameplate. So this, you know, you can see what it is. It's just positioned just to kind of resemble a little bit of an upper light source kind of hitting it. And that one, let's see, is at 50%. So you could go much higher if you wanted to. But inside, we've got our first name, pretty self-explanatory. You would just Caniel. I don't know a Caniel. Maybe Daniel. You just type over, and you can change the color the same way in your properties, in your character panel. Change it to the color that you want to. Very simple, very self-explanatory, pretty much. We have our first nameplate, so you could make this smaller if you wanted to, but of course you kind of want to leave room for longer names. So you could maybe look at all the names that you're working with, type in your longest name, and then adjust this to be as close as possible, just to keep this from being any bigger than it has to. Another little tip is if you do make it bigger or smaller and you want to make sure it's centered, hit Control or Command A, and that will select the entire canvas. Make sure you have your move tool selected. Make sure you have the layer selected as well that you want to center. You come up here and click on this horizontal centers button, and it'll get it perfectly center for you. Just make sure you unselect the canvas, which you can do by hitting Control or Command D to deselect. So I use that quite a bit. So same thing for the last name, same thing for the last name plate. I've got a nameplate vignette that's clipped to this subfolder, which you can see just kind of darkens. So just like all the others, you can move it around. You can go into the properties and increase, decrease. You can do all the things with that vignette. To change the color of the nameplates, there's color overlays. We've already kind of explained how that works. So you get the idea there. And then there are drop shadows on both of them. So you could always go into the drop shadow in the layer style panel and play with the opacity, the size, the distance, if you feel it will make your image look better. And then of course we've got our subtext, senior, junior, sophomore, freshman, which you can change to anything that you want. If it's not a high school team, you know, I think this example here, I just put flag football. You get the idea. It can be used for anything. And then I have a sample logo. I just thought it looks good to have their logo here if you can, but you can turn it off and leave it as it is if you want to. And that is it. So we made our way all the way through this vertical file. There's one thing I'm going to touch on the horizontal team file real quick, and we'll wrap this up. All right, real quick, I've got the 3 by 2 team image pulled up. It's a horizontal. The folder structure is just a little bit different. First thing I'll point out, if I open up the background layers folder, I actually have this subject frame shape in the background layers folder. So that's a little bit different. So if you turn it off, you can see it's there. While I'm talking about this, or while we're touching on this, this actually might be a decent alternate look. Now, I would probably change the color of this Trojans here and change the color of some of these accent layers so it's not so busy and distracting. But just to give you an idea, if I go to the background color and I go with white or almost white, you can kind of see that that might be a nice look. A little cleaner, a little more simple, but it's an option depending on what you're going for. I'll turn that back on. And then we also point out that our border text accent layers, if I turn it off, all of that is in this folder with this layer mask on it. So the layer mask should line up with this frame, you know, so just keep that in mind. And the only other thing I would say, I've touched on this in other videos, but your subject images, I've got 3 rows in here with gradient masks. So you may want more rows, you may want less rows. So you can turn these on, you can turn these off. You can also, let's see, this is row 3. You could duplicate. So I'm going to right click and duplicate group. And we'll just call it copy. So now we've got 2. We'll take the one below it and move it up. And now I've got another row. Now you want to scale your subjects a little smaller, you know, just for perspective. You could select all the rows together, scale them down. It just depends, you know, all these football teams are different sizes. Some of them, this is a smaller football team, but you may have a team, you know, with 50, 70, maybe more. So you just kind of have to set your rows up how it will work for the number of athletes that you have on your team. But I feel like this just gives you a good starting point. So we can go back to that. There we go. Go back. And that's it. So hopefully that covers everything. It's pretty thorough. But if for any reason there's anything left uncovered, you still have questions, reach out, don@thirdcreative.com. I'm always happy to help when I can. That is it for this one. And the busy season is coming, so I need to hurry up and move on to the next one. So thank you for watching, and until then, we'll see you.